Welcome to this third session of the course Skills for Effective Negotiations. In this session, we will be discussing the topics related to negotiation strategies and the conflict styles. I have prepared for you two or three readings I think are as practical as it gets, with a lot of good advice on strategies and tips for how we can conduct negotiations effectively. Of course, all this is within the paradigm of the notion of principled negotiations and using the proper communication skills and good focus on how we can extract our interests versus our positions. Those are the premises that we spoke about in the first 2 weeks. In this week, we'll be talking, as I mentioned, about the strategies and about also the conflict styles that you have already started to do your tests, the Thomas Kilmann test. I'll be explaining the 5 styles and what does it mean to us and share some true life examples as well. So let's get started. I will share my screen. So for this session of week 3, we will be talking about negotiation strategies and skills. And in one of the readings I have for you, it's called 7 Elements, and it has actually number 8, which is a conclusion of effective negotiations. I thought that it was a good summary of everything we've been talking about, and also organizes the ideas in a way that start to prepare us towards how we can actually engage. Another very good reading from the Harvard Program on Negotiations that you will have this week as well in your readings. I definitely encourage you to look at it. It has some very, very good practical tips for number one, what you get from training, and second, how to deal with some of the difficult situations during negotiations. I will be putting a couple of questions for you in the forum to capture some of what you will learn from that reading. Now, in terms of those elements here, the 8 elements, number one is relationship. And the question here is how much are you going to handle the relationship dimension of negotiations? In other words, if it's a long-term one, it doesn't always have to be long-term, but even if it is a short-term, you have an immediate relationship happening between you and the person you are negotiating. How are you going to make sure that this relationship is positive and healthy, as short as it may be? And that's where our compassionate negotiation, communication with sincerity, as many of you eloquently described in your post in the post to the forum, is really critical. So this is number one. Ask yourself the question: how much am I going to be able to deal with relationship effectively? Second, related to it, is communication. Am I ready to listen? And actually, that's really such a deep question. Am I ready to listen and to talk effectively? I think we have seen in our experiences, sometimes we are stuck in what we think must happen or what we think is right, and we don't want to listen. I still remember my son one time came to me with a little, very cute kitten. Or no, he told me that he wanted to have, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't a kitten, it was a bike. And he said, Dad, there's this guy who wants to sell a bike for me, like a neighbor, a little kid. And I was like so stubborn, I don't want to even hear about it. And he just, in a very gracious way, came to me and he said, Can you just at least come just take a look at it? Don't commit, just come take a look. And that kind of soft way of just asking me to just don't commit, just come and look, was really actually interesting. And I decided to go with him. And when I went, actually, I found that it was a good bike. And actually, it was a very reasonable price. And I thought, really, it is not a bad deal. And I actually accepted. And it's only because I agreed to listen. But I couldn't have agreed to listen if he had did a typical child thing of stomping and having a tantrum. No, he was very patient and very calm in trying to convince me to just at least come and look at it. I think that combination of how you talk effectively and how the other becomes willing to listen is the heart of this communication. Interests, I think we hammer this issue, and but it's really critical, especially in cultural context, and I'll address this next week. How do we define interest? Is it only the material issues, or are there more things? So I will reserve this deeper discussion of culture and how it relates to interest, or how we define our interest in light of other dimensions beyond the material gain, to next week. But the important thing now is to continue to think of How much do we insist on understanding interests beyond the positions and not to get stuck in the position? And options. How are we able to find good options that we think are going to address all the different dimensions? And then the alternatives. If things fall apart, what will happen? Do I have my BATNA? How does it look like? What will I get or what I will lose? And that should be part of how you are calculating how you're going to set up your situation in a negotiation. And then, of course, there's a question of legitimacy. What criteria will be using to persuade each other or each of us that we are not being ripped off? Back to the concept of objective criteria that we discussed before. How are we going to make sure that there is an objective criteria and that there is good understanding that yes, what we are agreeing on is legitimate? I will add to the legitimacy or a question that came up a lot in your role playing last night with negotiations over the salary, that many of you decided not to make a decision until you go back and discuss with your partner, which I think is a very good point to make, that we need to understand who also has a stake and how can we make sure that everyone is going to get what they think or have a say in what will happen. And then number 7, the commitment. What commitment should I seek or make? And the commitment goes all the way from, do I commit to be in the negotiations? And do I commit to what extent my commitment will last until I execute the agreement of this negotiations? How much guarantees and securities exist that will make sure that this commitment will last? And finally, when all this is done, the conclusion is, did I have a good outcome? And here, I would say that a good outcome is about, did I manage to achieve as much of my interest that is equal to or better than my BATNA? Did the other one as well achieve what they think is fair? Do we both feel that the agreement that we reached was fair? And is it implementable and executable? Against such criteria, we can determine if this was a good negotiations or not. So those are pretty much the 7 elements, adding to it the conclusion that I find that recap everything we've done in the last 2 weeks and can get us to move forward towards some of those styles and skills. As I mentioned again, the article from Harvard is very useful in giving you some very good tips, and I like to see how you're going to reflect them in your forum posts. For now, I will move to the 5 conflict styles. That's what I gave you yesterday, and you will be working on to complete and send me this week. And that Thomas Kilmann conflict style is designed to measure a person's behavior in conflict situations. But here, see how conflict situation is framed. Conflict situations are those in which the concern of 2 people appear to be incompatible. In such situations, we can describe an individual's behavior along 2 dimensions. Before I get to the dimensions, I just want to say that the definition of conflict situation here is kind of a soft one, meaning it doesn't necessarily require there is some element of violence or tension. It's just that what I want and what you want are incompatible. And that's exactly what we've been talking about when we talked about negotiations. We said that negotiations can be part of a conflict if we choose to have a definition of conflict that emphasizes some level of tension or violence, or it can be still a conflict if you want to call it, or a negotiation situation if you want to call it. Back to the 5 styles, the argument is that you can say that any individual's behavior can be measured along 2 dimensions. One is assertiveness, meaning to what extent I'm trying to achieve what I want. And that's the most important thing for me, to satisfy my own concerns. And the second is cooperativeness, to what extent I am willing or attempt to satisfy the other person's concerns. So between those 2 dimensions, on one hand, how much do I want to achieve for my own? The other side, how much I'm concerned for the other, and everything in between. So in this model, they came up with 5 styles that go along that spectrum from how much I want to achieve for myself versus how much I will be concerned for the other. Let's look at the 5 styles and what they mean. This is a nice chart that shows the concept of the 5 styles. That on one side here, there is assertiveness going up, and on the other side, there is cooperativeness. And if you go along those 2 lines, you will see that competing, for example, is something that is high on your assertiveness, meaning what you want to achieve for yourself, but very low on cooperativeness. And that's why it's in the very top left corner of that chart. The opposite of that is in the bottom of the chart is actually on the across all the way to the other side is accommodating. Accommodating is when you care so much for the interest of the other, for whatever reason it is, at the expense of what you want to achieve for yourself. And then avoiding becomes that you are running away from the situation. Neither are you being assertive, nor are you cooperating. You're just walking away from the situation as much as you can. That's avoiding. The opposite of that is collaborating. Collaborating is the highest point for both assertiveness and cooperativeness, meaning that you are trying to achieve simultaneously the best for yourself and for the other as well. And in the center of the chart is compromising, where you are trying to find some form of a middle ground between you and the other. So you are achieving some for yourself. That's why it's in the middle of the assertiveness bar, and also in the middle of the cooperativeness bar. You're getting something and losing something, as we say. Let's discuss each one of them and give some examples. Competing, it's about this, as you mentioned, assertive and uncooperative. Here you are trying to achieve as much as you can. And that comes from different reasons. Power, of course, is a big one. But I think more than power is when you are actually fighting for values and beliefs or very basic human needs that must be satisfied. And to the extent that the situation is related to any of those values or beliefs or very deep basic needs that you cannot compromise over, then I think you will actually be competing. Competing here means what? It means that I am just concerned about my own being and my own interest and what I want to achieve. I am unable or I am not willing or I cannot accept to look at the interest of the other because it is in a total contrast with what I believe in. That's one factor. Or because I have so much power that I feel like I don't need to budge or to go below what I want to achieve. This is maybe kind of like looks like and when we frame it like this, it sounds like competition is not a good thing. I will say that let us be careful that there are situations when you have to stand up for your rights. I mean, think of all the important situations where there is infringement of people's human rights. I mean, then you have to compete, if you use this terminology, if you want to stand up for the rights of those people. Because if you don't, I mean, there's no room for compromising on somebody's basic human rights as a human being violated. And here we need to stand up and to stand up to make sure that we are achieving as much for this person to guarantee their safety, security, and well-being. This is not a space for us to say, let's compromise on something. So compromising and cooperating and other forms are useful, definitely, and we encourage them. But there is also a space for competing and standing up for what is right. Think, for example, somebody being heavy on using domestic violence, and you find yourself in a situation where you need to guard and protect the victim in this case. You are not going to compromise on the safety of the person, but you're going to compete here. You are not going to allow for anything other than those important values to be upheld. So I want to say, don't look at competition as if we look down on it because we come from the field of peace and conflict resolution. No, always assess when is the right time to compete. That's competition. Accommodating. Accommodating is, as I said, the opposite. It is unassertive and it is cooperative. Here, you care for the other. You need to look selfless. You need to be generous. And there are many factors that can lead to this. I think the strongest is the kind of bond that connects you to somebody. Think of like you are taking care of an old elderly parent, and the elderly parent has certain needs. and they don't go really and match with what your own needs. What are you going to do? This is such a big moral dilemma, I'm sure, to many people. But ultimately, there's a tendency in situations like this to put that person first. You will always reflect on how much they took care of you when you were younger, how they helped you, how they supported you. And now, when they are in time of need, as much as their need is not matching with yours, how much are you going to put yourself first versus how much are you going to take care of them? And when you add to that some of the religious beliefs that people have in taking care of parents, having a reward in the hereafter, people can start to think that yes, accommodation is something good, and I should actually do it in certain situations. So there is definitely room for accommodation. And also, I think from a pragmatic point of view, especially in long-term relationships, in workplace and marriage relationships and other form of relationships, when you think that my connection to the person is not ending today, instead it is something that's ongoing, then it makes sense to accommodate today, knowing that tomorrow there will be a new situation and I may be the one asking you to accommodate me. And here I can use my accommodating you today as a bargaining chip to 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 create a situation that I deserve this time to be accommodated because I accommodated last time. I think that becomes actually a very useful technique and strategy actually to use in long-term relationships, is to know that not every time you want to compete, but sometimes you want to actually accommodate the other as long as it's not causing so much damage to you, of course, or shouldn't cause any damage, but that your loss is not going to be that significant compared to the gain. Number one, that the person will receive. Number two, their appreciation. Number three, that they will be willing to pay you back at a due time when you need their accommodating you. So it can be pragmatic. It can be about the bond in a relationship. And I'm sure there are many other instances that you can think that accommodation would make sense. And I would love to hear your examples in the forum posts. The third one is avoiding. And avoiding here is means like I am walking away from a situation. I do not want to deal with it. And I will say that there are situations where, yes, it might be not worth it to get engaged in this, or it is too dangerous, or it is for whatever reason you are not ready for it yet. So you need to walk away until you prepare yourself better. And that goes actually to some of the literature on the pre-negotiation preparation. And are you ready to enter into negotiations or not? Maybe you are not ready. So maybe you just need to walk away and then until you are better prepared. But there are times when avoiding actually becomes an important technique because it may help you actually to achieve other interests. I have a story I always share about avoiding that happened when I was very young, actually, in my family. We grew up in Cairo, in Egypt, and in the summer, all middle-class families would go to spend a couple of weeks on the beach in Alexandria. So we always looked forward to this as children. So our parents would take us there in the summer. We went to Alexandria and we were at the beach with my parents. I remember one day, and they had a couple of their friends of my parents, joining us. And so we were a big group of people, my parents, their friends, myself, my brothers, and some other kids really from the family who came, joined us. We're all having a great time. And we had also part of the culture in that part of the world is that many of those middle class families will have some young person as a servant to work for them. Usually a very simple poor person who comes from the village and they are desperate for some work and they come and work in the houses of those fairly affluent people. That happens in many places in all over the world. So there was this young boy who was working for our friends, and he was there helping, playing around also. And you can imagine how simple person like that, whose job is to be a servant, finally is going one day to the beach. So he's so happy. It happens that day that there was this person sitting close to us, he and his family. We don't know them. We never met that guy before. And he seemed to be in a bad mood. I mean, this guy, for a couple of hours, we were sitting at the beach. He picked fights with two, three people at least. It was very strange. He picking up fights with somebody sitting next to them, picking a fight with a simple merchant who's selling some sweets and to children. And he seemed to be a troubled person and we just didn't care for him. However, a few minutes later, he comes towards us where we're sitting under our umbrella, and he's dragging that little boy, the servant boy who works for our friends. And he just dragged that boy and stood in front of my father. Because my father looked kind of like he's the big guy of that gathering. My father was a fairly big built man, and he was a judge. So he has a big social status and everything. So anyway, this guy comes in front of my father, and he just pulled that boy in front of my father, and he said, "Is this boy with you?" And my father was like, we all stunned, and then we said, "Yes." And he said, "He is not behaving well, and I had to smack him." And he just threw the boy in front of my father. Obviously, he was like looking for a fight, looking to pick up some tension with my father and the group. And to my surprise, actually, I found that my father looked him in the eye for a second when he acted this way. And then what he did was he just my father turned it to his friends and started to talk to them as if nothing happened. He totally avoided the situation. What this did is it made that guy standing with this anger and fuming, realizing that nobody was reciprocating that anger and fuming or nothing. And he just looked like, I don't know what to do, and he just walked away. And my father continued his discussion, and we continued to have a very good day. I share that story after 50 plus years because I think it was an example of how avoiding may be necessary because you have more important issues to be concerned about. My father probably is concerned about having a stable, peaceful day, not to disrupt it by in any means. He was concerned about his status as a judge and not to actually find himself getting in a fight with some person on the beach. And also, and even though we don't like what happened to that little boy, but at least now the little boy was in our safety with us. So it was better not to get into this issue and to avoid it altogether. And now, after 50 plus years, I share that example in some of my workshops and classes that sometimes in our life avoiding may work. And sometimes actually when you see that tension in the longer term relationship with a partner or so on, and there is a lot of tension, sometimes avoiding being quiet may help. Not always, but there are times when avoiding will be useful at a certain moment in order not to escalate, not to raise the tension that is happening. And you wait until things calm down and then you start to discuss and understand what happened. So it can be used tactically to know when is it appropriate to avoid. Collaborating. I would say collaborating is perhaps the most popular and favorite approach that we think about in peace and conflict studies and in negotiations. I would say collaborating means what? It means principled negotiations. It is unlike compromise, which I'm going to explain in a minute. Collaborating is really about going deeper, understanding what's important for you, what's important for me. Why do we want to both, what do we, each of us want to achieve? Can we find ways to discover collaboratively good options that will make me achieve as much as I want, and as much as you want, and we maintain a healthy ongoing relationship, whether for this short-term relationship or long-term one. That's collaboration. It's a problem solving. It's going deeper beyond what is on the surface into the underlying interests and needs, and then finding ways to satisfy them. Everything we discussed in the last 2 weeks. Compromising is similar to collaboration, except it is maybe simpler, if I want to say, and it is about finding a middle point, finding where can I let go of something and you let go of something, and we find a way to get by. It is useful in many types of situations, especially when the focus is on, say, monetary issues. You're going to buy something and the seller wants $100, you are offering 80, you meet at 90. This is perhaps the simplest way of thinking of compromising. In some cases, it is perfect and it works well, it is quick. You walk away feeling, okay, I got something and lost something, and the same for the other, so fair enough. And again, that again is my Batna, for example. It was still a good deal, so I don't have any problem with it. But even then, I would say compromising is not necessarily something that can work always, especially on financial issues. No, sometimes it is actually problematic. And again, if you allow me, I'll share another story. Not when I was a child, actually, when I was in my like mid 20s. At that time, I came to the U.S. for the first time on a fellowship for 1 year, and I was a member of this fellowship with 20 other people from Egypt. We were a big group, 20 people, all of us living very close to each other and going to George Mason University in the Washington, D.C. area. And we didn't know each other from before, so we were building our relationship as we move forward. Maybe a couple of months into being in the US, there was this guy who was in the group, and one time he asked me to borrow $20. So I gave him the $20. I waited for a couple of days. He did not give me back the money. Waited a few more days, a week. Still, he did not pay me the money. So when I saw him, I said to him, "Where is my $20?" He said, "I gave it to you." I said, "No, I did not get my $20 from you." He said, "No, I did give it to you. You just forgot, or I don't know what was happening with you, but I did give you your $20. What is that? You want to take it again?" I was like very upset, of course, and I kind of stopped talking to him. I became very, very hurt. And it started to affect the way we are engaging with each other and with the rest of the group, especially those who lived close to each other and we used to go to each other's house every now and then. Now I am not talking to him. Now when he comes, I will go stay in my room. I don't go to his house. It created a lot of tension, and that affected the harmony of the group. So of course people knew what happened. So one time, a couple of our friends wanted to intervene and try to help us. So I remember my roommate came to me and he tried to find a good solution. He said, "How about if he just pays you $10? So instead of you getting the entire 20, and he claims that he paid it, he just give you $10 and that will resolve the whole issue." Do you think I accept it? Will you accept? I'm just asking you who are watching this. I did not accept it. I felt no way. That is just like, I know that the issue for me is not necessarily the number 10 to 20. It's about that I know I did not receive this money. And for him to say I received it and as if I'm trying to get it again, it is actually an insult to my dignity, insulted to my morals, to my values, to my sense of righteousness, and that I wouldn't do something like this. And $10 is making it even worse. So I refused that arrangement, and I just decided to stay with my boycotting that person because of what happened. And it took a long time before we calmed it down and forgot about it. But it was for me again an example of, will you compromise every time, or there are times when you're going to say no? That's not when we compromise. And maybe that's why actually even linguistically in English, the word compromise has sometimes a negative connotation. Somebody compromising themselves, compromising their values. That means that they are actually doing something bad to themselves or to their values. So, but yeah, sometimes you say it's a good compromise. I mean, so it has this negative and positive connotation. And I think that's because it's not always perfect. So again, those are the 5 styles that have been developed by Thomas and Kilman. I think they are very useful for any of us to reflect on them, to think what do they mean, and are you stuck in one of them? Do you know how to navigate them? And do you have a good examples of how they worked and did not work in different situations? And that's what I hope that we engage in for this session and for the posts that we will be getting from you for the next week. And we discuss in the webinar, and we'll discuss also your results of the test. My final word about this is that whether compromise, whether collaborate, avoid, accommodate, or compete, each one has its own time. Each one, there's room for it, whether as a strategy for a complete negotiation or for specific issues within a negotiation. However, I would also admit that in the field of peace and conflict resolution, we try to highlight collaboration. We try to get more people to learn how to do this. We think that this is really a transformative way for people to know how to grow and how to be better human beings in dealing with issues that otherwise they often are stuck in competing or avoiding or not or compromising when they shouldn't be. And that's what we're trying to help more people in such courses to think about. How can I be the one in charge of the 5 styles instead of having one of the or two of those styles being in charge of me? This is the key of what we're trying to achieve. So that's pretty much all I have for you for this week. So your task is complete the Thomas Kilmann test, please, and send it to me by Friday. And then complete the forum exercise. I'm going to, of course, send the information today. You'll have it ready tomorrow. And then keep up with the readings and the videos. And please read that Harvard article. Very interesting reading, simple, easy to read, non-academic, but very practical. And then, of course, attend the interactive session with me on Saturday. That's all I have for you. And I hope this was useful. And looking forward to receiving information from you, to work on your posts, and really looking forward to read the posts of